Good morning. This is Heather from the Return to Work Mentor podcast. So today I want to speak with you about recovery and return to work and how the two are very often not linear and not smooth. This is a conversation that comes up regularly with my clients, and it's interesting because although I'm going to speak very broadly, it does apply to many types of conditions or injuries and illnesses people might be struggling with that are impacting their return to work. So even if you have a long-term condition, this will still be relevant, but perhaps more so, mostly for those who are learning how to deal with something new, whether that's new and permanent or new and going to take some time to recover from. So when we talk about the recovery from the physical perspective and the mental and emotional perspective, psychology, those things are never linear. We would all love it, clinicians and patients together, if the trajectory of recovery was clearly defined, if we could put a timeline on it, and if we knew that if you reach stage A, then you would reach stage B, then you would reach stage C. So sadly, that's often not the case. And even though it might be the case in one domain, so maybe there is a clear treatment pathway for what you're struggling with, and it's not necessarily combined with a linear recovery in terms of your emotions and psychology. And so the problem becomes when we inadvertently expect it to be smooth, plain sailing, and a continual improvement trajectory. Now, this is not an unusual expectation, because if you've never been ill or injured before, then you've never experienced a recovery before, and you've no idea how this is going to play out. And I think that's very fair. This is a situation which you didn't plan to find yourself in, that you may not have experienced with anybody close to you, and therefore you have no previous expectations on which to base your thoughts about your recovery. So to start with, the most common problem that I come across is people thinking that it's going to be a lot quicker than it really is. So perhaps you've just had a diagnosis, maybe you've had a heart attack, maybe you've got a cancer diagnosis, maybe you've had a stroke, and you're thinking, well, okay, it's just going to take me a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, maybe 3 months to recover from this thing, and then I'll be right as rain, I'll be back to normal, and I'll be able to carry on as before. Now I think I mentioned it in an earlier podcast, that there's some benefit to this not knowing at the beginning, because if we truly knew what was ahead of us, then that might be too daunting and it might feel very overwhelming. There's an element here of denial and survival, that actually it's easier to believe that it's all going to get sorted out really rather quickly, and rather than having to deal with the reality of what may well be a long-term recovery and a long-term management strategy. So I don't want to take away that optimism, but I want to replace it, or companion it, I suppose, with some realism. And that if you're feeling great now, I hope that continues for you, but it may well be that there's some rocky parts of the road ahead. And when that comes to planning your treatment and recovery, there's a couple of things I want to say there, really. First of all, let's talk about treatment and rehabilitation. So treatment and rehabilitation are often used in the same phrase and terminology. But if you want to make a distinction, I would say that treatment is often something that is done to you by other people, other interventions. It's something that you are subject to in terms of your body. And so for instance, it may be chemotherapy or having some surgery or something like that. Then the rehabilitation comes after. And this is about learning how to live with the situation, making changes to your lifestyle, but also rebuilding your capacity physically, emotionally, psychologically. So those elements are really important, because there's a phase where you may be having treatment-specific interventions where you simply cannot function in a way that you would like, in the way that you did before. But it will usually have some time frame on it in terms of expecting how long it's going to last, whether it's weeks or months, and then having an end point. And again, we've also spoken about that in the past, and I'll probably do another episode on that often the problem comes when the treatment ends, that the support network that you may have had around you disappears, and the expectations that you will be fully recovered are not realized. And then rehabilitation actually needs to happen alongside, and also returning to work often needs to happen alongside. And it doesn't all have to happen on the same timelines, but they may be overlapping timelines. So rehabilitation in its broadest sense about trying to working towards recovery, towards the life that you were living before in terms of the function, your ability to do the things that you need to do in life and that you want to do in life. And then we often talk about a return to work in my professional world as vocational rehabilitation. So that is part of returning you to working or volunteering or meaningful activities that contribute to your value in life, your feelings of fulfillment, perhaps. So there's all these strands going along together. And unfortunately, they don't always fit together in terms of where you feel with one of those strands is not going as well as another strand, maybe. You may feel that treatment holds you back. You may feel that rehabilitation is too slow. You may want to be back at work, but your body and your mind aren't ready. And these can lead to huge amounts of frustration, because what we hoped to be a smooth transition back into work and back to normal simply doesn't happen. Now, wherever possible, I try to discuss this with clients in terms of when we start something new, whether it's physical rehabilitation, emotional, psychological rehabilitation, and the return to work rehabilitation, that because we are changing things, often there will be a flare-up of symptoms. Now, whether this is pain, fatigue, or mood, those are the top three biggies, are the biggest symptoms that people struggle with. It's really common that when we introduce something new, a new variable, if you like, then we struggle to manage that initially. It's any change in life, we struggle. And sometimes it can be a really positive change, but it's still a change of routine, change of structure, change of way of thinking, way of behaving, way of being. And those things are not easy to do. They require a consistent, persistent attitude to continuing along the path that you've chosen for your recovery. And I find this, say, often with physical rehabilitation when it comes to pain, is that we do find, especially with persistent pain conditions, that beginning rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation and or return to work can trigger a flare-up in the pain symptoms. Now, this can obviously be interpreted quite negatively. Things are getting worse, or I'm going to re-injure myself. But often what we'll need to do is reframe that into reminding ourselves that the body needs training time, and it needs time to adapt to the changes that we're placing on it. And as a result of that, it's actually normal adaptation to have some increase in discomfort and aches and pains. And we'll often work with people to determine, well, is this increase in symptoms related to the fact that we've changed what you're doing, we've increased your activity, or we've changed the way you move, and this is your body having a momentary protest about that, which may need to be sat with and worked through to some extent. And I say to some extent because this is where it's really helpful to have the input of your healthcare professional, because what is an appropriate amount of discomfort to flare up, or fatigue to flare up, or drop in mood? And the most critical thing is to ensure that you do have support during that process, so that you do know that some of this might be normal. This might be a normal response to increasing your activity and trying to do more. Right, just had a pause for passing cyclists there. So, yes, working with somebody who can support you in going through these times where it feels that you're going over physically, metaphorically rocky ground in terms of dealing with your symptoms fluctuating and knowing if that's normal or not. And often it will be a case of trial and error. And I say this to clients, but it's still hard for people to hear, is that if your symptoms are made worse by the change in activities, then often that is information that is really useful to us. So we reframe it in a way that says, well, what can we learn from this? Did we Do we increase activity too quickly? Was it an activity where it was too demanding and we need to modify it? Is it something that needs changing, or is it something that just needs a bit more time than we had anticipated? And I think it can be hard. It can be hard to deal with this reality because, we would love it for it to be linear. I, as a clinician and a mentor, would really love that this process is smooth, and I can promise you the world. But the truth is that's not how it happens. The human body, the human mind and psyche, it just doesn't work like that. And it often interprets changes in activity, increases in activity as a threat. And then that threat sets off our nervous system into fight and flight or even freeze. And then it can feel very difficult, frightening even, to proceed. And that's when we need to have strategies in place that enable us to recognize when the body and mind is going into that overdrive, into that fight and flight or freeze, and be able to use those strategies to come back to a more neutral place, a more peaceful and calm place, where we can look at the response to the rehabilitation or to the return to work from an objective place and say, okay, does something need to be changed now then? Did that work? Didn't it work? How can we evolve it? So I hope that's been a useful insight, and really it's a little bit of a plea from my point of view to give your clinicians, your mentors, a little bit of time to work with you, because we don't always get it all correct. Literally everybody, every human is different in how they respond. And until we try something together with you as a client, we don't know whether we've got the right solution for you or not. And there needs to be time to explore, to navigate, to find the best way forward for you. And I just want to finish that off really with personal anecdote. I'm now 6 years since my personal diagnosis of a stroke and blood cancer. I was becoming unwell for several months before that. I won't go into all the details here. If I've not already done that in a previous episode, I'll do that another time. So 6 years on, I have gone through so many different iterations of how I'm going to manage my condition and how I can work in a way that's effective for helping me manage my health. And I'm still tweaking it now. I'm still reflecting and changing things all the time. I try not to do it like constantly. I try to maybe have a 3-month plan, work to that plan, and then reevaluate that plan unless something clearly doesn't work straight away. I'll give you just a very recent example. I've just recently changed my timetable around slightly, and I ended up being online without a break in my day for lunch, which it's kind of not too bad from a hunger point of view. But what happened is by the time I did get to a break, I had a really bad headache. And I tend to get my headaches where my stroke happened. And then what follows is cognitive fatigue. So immediately I can switch and say, right, well, next time that event is on, I need to have a rest and eat before, rather than allowing myself to go through the length of the day thinking I'll eat afterwards or break afterwards. So that's just a really simple example. So I would be doing you a disservice if I told you that recovery and return to work and the remaining in work, dealing with a long-term health condition or a serious injury or illness, was going to be easy, was going to be straightforward, was going to have a really clear timeline and you'll be fine and back to normal afterwards. It simply doesn't work that way in most cases. And if we can set our expectations with that, set our expectations to expect ups and downs and ebbs and flows, rocky ground, smooth ground, times when you feel that you are in the darkest hole that you don't know how to get out, but then also once you are out the other side, recognizing how far you've come and recognizing what you need to do in order to keep yourself in that better place, the best of your ability. So if you would like any more help and support, then please do visit my website, which is returntoworkmentor.co.uk. There are some digital resources on there. So there's a short course, there's some free resources, and you can also book one-to-one support with me if you'd like. And in every circumstance, there's always an option to have a short free chat, just to make sure that you can get the right help from the right place at the right time for you.